So there is and has been a concerted effort to privatize the post office for quite some time now, and we have seen that ramp up underneath the Trump administration. But this is in no way a new thing. But there are people speculating as to why this has really accelerated underneath Donald Trump. And so what I want to do is play this a portion of this clip that Now This News put out that basically goes over maybe what some of Trump's motivations could be, because recently Democrats are trying to push for $25 billion of relief for the post office. And this is obviously because of the financial constraints that have happened because of coronavirus. I mean, just a bailout like all the other bailouts that we've seen happen. But Donald Trump doesn't want this to happen. And so I'm going to play this clip and then we'll come back and really break this down.
So they want 25 billion for the post office. They want 2.5 with 3.5 billion dollars for universal mailing, 3.5 billion, and they're not going to do a deal that's good for the American people. Therefore, they're not going to get the 3.5 billion. Therefore, they can't do the universal mail-in vote. It's very simple. How are they going to do it if they don't have the money to do it? Now, they need that money in order to have the post office work so it can take all of these millions and millions of ballots. Now, in the meantime, they aren't getting there. By the way, those are just two items. But if they don't get those two items, that means you can't have universal mail-in voting because they're not equipped to have it. The bill's not going to happen because they don't even want to talk about it, because we can't give them the kind of ridiculous things that they want that have nothing to do with the China virus. It has nothing at all to do with China virus, much of what they're asking for.
And so basically I want to break this down into two kind of different portions. The first is this larger project that has been an attempt to privatize the post office, and then kind of where Trump's angle of this all fits into it. So I mean, all the way back in 2006 there was a bill passed through Congress, and it was passed bipartisanly, I should point that out. But it was basically, there was a lot of, I guess, fear surrounding pensions and 401ks around that time, and because I mean they just weren't successful. The 401k system was just not working, and so Congress passed this legislation where the post office had to fund like health benefits for their employees 75 years out. They had to have the funds for the next 75 years of health benefits for their employees, which is, I mean, a crazy burden to put on any organization. I mean, no private company has to do that. No other government entity has to do that. It was just put on the post office. And I mean, they were having to fund benefits for people who weren't even born yet. That is how ridiculous this was. And the reason for this is it was going to make it look like the post office was losing a tremendous amount of money. And I mean, because I'm sure you guys have heard it before, the idea that the post office is, loses billions and is unsuccessful. And when in reality, I mean, the post office is one of the most successful programs in this country. I mean, if you look at the rest of the world, our post office is looked at like a model, as like what things are supposed to look like. I mean, it's when you think about how large the US is, and it's the universality of the post office where anyone can do it. You can be in Washington and send a post, and send something over to New Jersey, and it's not super expensive. And in terms of rates for postage, I mean, they've gone up basically with inflation. So like, I mean, you can go back 30 years ago, if you adjust for inflation, postage costs about the same. And the post office gives pretty good, like, the good wages to their workers. There's not a whole lot of it's remained cheap, good wages for the workers, and it is entirely self-sufficient. That is the other angle of this, is up until very, very recently, the post office, all of its funding came from postage. It was entirely reliant on itself. It was not funded by tax dollars, which made it very difficult to privatize, because conservatives normally would want to we'll just cut funding to it if we don't want to privatize it. But because it was self-sufficient, they had to go a different way, which is putting this crazy thing where they have to fund 75 years out so they can say, oh, it's losing a bunch of money, it makes sense to privatize it. And so basically now we have the Trump administration, and Trump has appointed a new postmaster general. I believe his name is Louis DeJoy. I might be wrong on that name, but I believe it's Louis DeJoy. Anyway, he is a former CEO for like a logistics firm, and he is also a big time Republican donor. And under him, the post office has seen considerable slowdowns, and there are specific reasons for this. I mean, DeJoy has cut down on the ability for postal workers to do overtime, And that, I mean, obviously that's going to slow things down if workers can't work overtime. It's a bunch of cost cutting measures. And the thing is, because there's this kind of mystique and era that the post office is losing money, that's his reasoning. His rationale is like, oh, I'm trying to cut money, it's cut spending to make the post office more affordable, I guess, more profitable. But because of that, there have been significant slowdowns. I mean, we have people who aren't getting their medication in a timely fashion. Like there are very real effects of the post office slowing down in the ways that it has, and just little stuff like if people like if postal workers are like leaving like the sorting room, they're not allowed to like pick up like extra like mail. Like usually they would be allowed to, like, if they had normally what they'd be doing, but they'd see like, oh, this mail that just came in is on my route, I'm allowed to go grab it and take it out with me. They're not allowed to do that anymore. And I know that's a very like minutia thing, but it's just little stuff like that that have really slowed things down. And so, I mean, Trump says it basically right there. A big reason that it seems why he is not a fan of this is because of mail-in voting, and he is basically kind of playing the long game here, where he's planting these seeds in people's minds right now, where he's like, oh, well, I mean, Democrats are saying that they need this money to do mail-in voting, and if I don't give them this money, I guess they can't do mail-in voting. And so if mail-in voting does happen, which is going to happen in a number of states, Trump's going to say, well, they didn't have the money. So, I mean, like, there must have been fraud. There must have been fraud, because Trump has been talking so much about the mail-in voter fraud. And I loved it when one of the reporters asked him how he votes, and because he votes via absentee ballot, through the mail. And it's just like, I mean, it's absurd, this idea. There's no credible evidence that there's any reasonable voter fraud that happens. And it's honestly, I think that there's been some evidence that it's more frequent at polling places. And so it's just it's a completely made up scenario, this thing. I mean, there are states that already do it. I believe Utah and Oregon already do mail-in voting. This isn't like a brand new thing. But Trump wants basically a way out of, if he loses the election, to say, oh, I didn't lose because of mail-in voting. And he's planting these seeds. He was doing it literally prior to 2016. Now, it's ironic because he ended up winning, and Hillary Clinton spent a very long time saying that she didn't actually lose. And apparently that's just where we are now, where both sides will say that they didn't lose. But I think that that's what Donald Trump was doing. And he was literally already doing it prior to 2016. This is not like new to him. He was doing it in the last election. But regardless, I mean, it's important that we have the post office. I mean, there are a whole host of ramifications of privatizing the post office that are not good for a lot of different people. People in rural areas, frankly, just wouldn't be able to get mail in some instances if it's just not profitable for a private corporation to deliver mail. And so anyway, that's kind of just a brief kind of summary and what's going on regarding the post office. Hopefully, that 25 billion gets passed, because we really need the post office. But regardless, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you disagreed with anything I said, please leave a comment down below. But if you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day.